Hi guys, and welcome back to World of Tanks, and I'm going to be looking at one of the two new monster tanks to hit World of Tanks, the Dragon Type 62. Now it's a tier 7 Chinese light tank. Looks really nice as well. One of the nicest looking monster tanks, I think. In fact, I'll just try and show you. So I've got this Halloween garage, so the lighting's a bit off, but I'll try and show you the dragon's head on the end of the barrel and the actual scales down the barrel. You can't see, there you go, try and get the dragons in view, but it's quite difficult again with this sort of lighting. But yeah, Chinese light tank, tier 7, and essentially this is a WZ-131. The Type 62 is actually the real world designation of the WZ-131, and I think the WZ-131 that we have in game sort of represents it from prototyping through to maybe actual production. But I'm not entirely sure, I could be wrong on that one. But anyway, yeah, this is definitely a WZ-131, but a premium version with a very, like I say, very nice skin. I don't normally do a video tomorrow, Saturday, but I think I will probably try and get the review of this up right now. This is where my German pronunciation is going to be quite amusing. Now, I'm assuming, because the Löwe has got the umlaut over the O, which I think, if I remember my German lessons correctly, it stretches the sound, which is why it's the Löwe and not the Lowe or the lower. So I'm assuming this is like the Herlin Hund, but I could be completely wrong and it could just be the Holland Hund. But anyway, there you go. I'm just going to call it the Hellhound from now on, but I'll be looking at that one in another review tomorrow. So I'm going to be looking at this one, and yeah, let's just get this out of the way. The crew, the name, Dilong Wang. That's its original crew name. I haven't named it that. That's the name that this crew came with, and they are one of my better Chinese crews. So I thought to put them in this one. And also, because I've purchased these are not loan tanks, these are actually my own. I'm actually getting a ×2 crew XP on them for every match I play, so it's nice for training up crews for the next few days. I think that's the Monsters Among Us op that's on at the moment. Yep, and basically just play a battle in any of the monster tanks and you will get ×2 crew XP on them. So any of you that have picked them up, there you go. Anybody that's got them, jump in them. They're going to be great for crew trainers right now. And anybody else, you will have a chance to obviously earn a monster tank if you're not looking at buying one, and you know, once you've earned it, you will have that ×2 XP for the remainder of the 27 days I think it is that it's on. And I think the earn up comes on next week. These two are not earnable though. Only the original 4 monster tanks are, but these two are not. But let's get into it and actually have a look at it. I've actually, to be perfectly honest, found it a little bit disappointing. It looks really nice, but there are a few issues that I have with it, which I'll sort of go into. It's got the stock engine from the 131, the WZ-131, so only 430 horsepower, and it's not got either of the top guns. The WZ-131 has a choice of 2. Basically the Type 64 85T, I think it is, or 100mm gun. This has got it's sort of one of the medium guns on it, which is the 62 85. Well, this is called the TS, but it's the T basically. So 10.9 rounds a minute, or 10.91, 145 pen, 180 damage, 220 on your premium, which are heat, again 180 and 43 300 for your HE, 2.3 second aiming time and 0.37 accuracy. So aiming time and accuracy I don't think are too bad. They're pretty average for a tier 7 light tank as far as I can remember. You know, there's some better, there's some worse, it's just one of those things. 54 degrees of full traverse, which is really quite nice for a light tank. Some are a bit slower than that. I think it's mostly the Russians possibly. But the traverse on the Chinese tanks, I do remember them being quite good on the light tanks. And you do have a little bit of armour on here, but we'll talk about that in a moment. You've got 48 degree traverse on your turret, so it is slightly slower than your hull. Doesn't usually affect it too much, to be honest. Only when you're doing really sharp turns does it really affect it, and it can't keep up. And you've got a 390 meter view range, which is slightly at the lower end of tier 7 lights. Most of them are 400 meters. I think the only one that isn't is possibly the LTTB, which is again 390. And I think one of the reasons I'm quite disappointed with this is because Chinese light tanks, I feel, have been left behind anyway. In fact, yeah, I think I'll get into that. I don't know, I don't want to make the garage a bit too long. We'll have a look at the supplies. So 170 for your AP, nice and cheap. 4,800 for your heat, which is quite expensive. and 130 for your high explosive, and I've been very boring with my consumables so far. And equipment, very basic for sort of setting up for, it's kind of like my standard medium setup: vertical stabilizer, gun rammer, and coated optics, which is kind of my standard setup for anything that I'm going to be doing sort of active scouting in, because obviously coated optics are always active. Skill wise, well, a good start is what I've got there really. Situational awareness, definitely, because your view range is a bit lacking anyway. Camouflage, sixth sense, brothers in arms is always good as a good starting point, and repairs as well, which a lot of people sometimes forget on their light tank crews, but obviously if you get tracked, you want to get up and running as quickly as possible. So sometimes I'd even put track mechanic on there later on. But yeah, I will go into this now. The reason I find this quite disappointing is, like I say, light tanks have been, well, Chinese light tanks, I feel, have been left behind quite a lot. They are some of the slower of the light tanks in the game, tier for tier, and that's with power to weight ratio and top speed generally. The guns are normally quite nice, but I do feel that they've been left behind somewhat, and I think with that, because the WZ-131 has one of the lower power to weight ratios of all the tier 7 light tanks, and its top speed is one of the lower as well. I think the only one that's less is the Sparpanzer IC, and I just feel that really the Dragon, because they're already so lacking, the tier 7, the Chinese lights, that the Dragon has had a bit too much taken away from it for it to be really competitive in especially tier 10 matches, but sometimes in tier 9 as well. And I think that really it should have either had this gun on it with the 159 pen, 200 damage. It's still got the same rate of fire as the one that it's got, but it's just got that bit extra pen, but not too much, and the extra damage. I don't think it should have had the 100mm on. I think, you know, obviously premium tanks can't be better than the tech tree versions, because then it is actually, you know, pay to win. But they can be as good as, and a lot of them are. Lycan is exactly the same as the tech tree one. The Gorinich is exactly the same as the standard KV5. The Crafts Panther is, in some ways, it's at least as good as a normal Panther, and in some ways better, some ways slightly worse, but it's at least as good as. And the Kaiju is exactly the same as a Tech Tree OI, so I don't see why this couldn't have at least had this gun on it with a slightly higher pen and damage, and the top engine, which is, you know, 520. It's only 90 more horsepower, but I think it really needs it. But that's, you know, it is what it is. You know, I've passed on my opinions to Wargaming, and that's it really. There's not much else I can do. It is what it is. But let's have a look at the modules. Oh, bonuses, by the way. Don't forget, this does play up to tier 10. It is a tier 7 light. 40% silver and 25% XP bonus. So it's not too, you know, quite nice bonuses. 880 hit points. But do be aware, if I've worked it out right, because what's the Lycan? You get 6 shots at 150 per shot. So what's that? About 900 average per clip. So a Lycan, the other tier 7 monster tank, light tank, can clip one of these, so do be aware of that when you come across Lycans on the battlefield. Now, engine wise, well, like I say, that sort of lower horsepower translates to a power to weight ratio of 20.48, which is quite low for a light tank. There's a lot of mediums that have got the same, if not higher, sort of tier 7 and what have you. And tier 8 as well, and I say tier 8 because obviously with it being a tier 7 light, only under very extenuating circumstances will you ever be in a tier 7 game. In fact, I don't think I ever have been in tier 8 games and tier 8 light tanks. Very, very rarely, and it is under extenuating circumstances. Basically, when there's nothing tier 9 and 10 sort of in the matchmaker at the time, it just puts you into a tier 8 game. So yeah, a lot of tier 8 mediums do have, are faster than this with the acceleration. 60 kilometers an hour top speed, which again is on the lower side for the tier 7 light tanks. The only one slower is the Sparpanzer, I think, because I was looking at that earlier. 23 in reverse, which isn't too bad, and a 12% chance of fire, which is really quite nice. So you're less likely to get set on fire, but you do have to be aware that you do have engine components in the front. I think that's a fuel tank. And in the back, very much like the Type 59 and a lot of the Chinese tanks, and that makes sense because this was supposed to be a lightened version of the Type 59, for operation in the mountainous and sort of wet southern regions of China, where it needed to be lighter and more nimble. So it makes sense that the components are in pretty much the same place. The gun itself, well, it's very Chinese with its gun depression, only -5, which is a bit of an issue, and it can be, and you've really got to learn your placement with these Chinese tanks. Mediums and the light tanks both have very little gun depression. You do have 20 of elevation, so it's not too bad if anything gets above you, but you do really have to adjust your playstyle for these Chinese tanks. And you know, they're not easy tanks to use at first. They do take a bit of getting used to with that, and basically over the back of the tank there is virtually no gun depression at all, it seems. Now, terrain resistances are ever so slightly better than the WZ131 at 0.5, 0.6 and 1.3, so they are pretty nice terrain resistances, so you know, you do tend to keep your speed up over most terrain. Turrets on top. Radio is, and it's harder to see on this Halloween garage, in the back of the turret on the left. Ammunition blocks, well, quite a few in the side of the tank, one in the side of the turret, and a nice big one behind the fuel tank. Nice safe place to have an ammo rack, isn't it? Behind a container of explosive liquid, obviously. So there you go. Yeah, you can damage the ammo racks through the front, through the sides. It's pretty easy to hit the ammo racks on these things. Shell velocity is a bit slow as well with this gun, 793 meters a second, and that's for your heat and for your armor piercing. Heat is normally slower than APCR anyway. And the crew, you've only got 3 crew in here, so you've got the driver, you've got the gunner, and the commander, and they'll sort of double up as radio operators and loader as well. Concealment is quite nice though at 0.32, and obviously that's stationary and moving because it's a light tank, so it keeps both of those. Armor wise, not much to speak of, although it is better armoured than most of the tier 7 light tanks. Obviously, you know, the LTTB is quite a little armoured light tank beast. But on this one, you've got 45 on the front of the turret, 35 on the front of the hull, 20 on the side and rear of the hull, and 30 on the side of the turret and 20 on the rear. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is the difference between sort of a pen and a bounce and something overmatching you. Most light tanks, basically most guns that they'll come up against will overmatch their armour because it's so thin. Whereas with this, because it is slightly thicker armour, you know, there are angles where you can bounce a few shots on this. It's not something that you rely on, but it's one of those things that occasionally, you know, when you're pulling back round a corner and your front's at a very extreme angle, you'll get a bounce, whereas if you're in something else with, like, say, 25mm of front upper glacis armour, it'd probably overmatch, so it's not too savage. But yeah, there's not really much to say armour-wise. As you can see there, your lower glacis, side of the turrets, and it just gets a bit thicker as you come forwards. But generally, you don't really need to aim at a light tank to pen it. Most of them are quite flimsy, apart from, like I say, the LTTB. But yeah, so there you go. I'm going to talk a bit about it more in the replays, but let's get into those. I think we've spent enough time in the garage. Right, so here we are for the first of the replays, and for anybody that has sort of missed the garage bit, like I say, just to recap, the reason I'm disappointed with this is because I feel that light tanks, Chinese light tanks especially, and the Chinese mediums have kind of been left behind with power creep, more so with the Chinese lights, I think. And I mean, I can't even remember the last time any of them had anything significant done to them. In fact, in this update, the only thing that really happened to the lights was the 131 got slightly improved terrain resistance. And having said that, like I say, with you know, me feeling that they've been left behind, and this basically being a premium WZ131, I think that it was a little much that it's had the stock engine put in it, and you know, one of the sort of mid-level guns on it, and it still sees tier 10. In fact, I think in the next replay I was shooting at the side of an E75 and bouncing. So it kind of gives you an idea of, you know, how troublesome this gun can be in certain rounds. And I've not been having a very good day in it, because I'd sort of got myself into a bit of a bad mood with the tank, with the fact that, like I say, it got that smaller engine when the WZ131 isn't particularly fast anyway, and that gun as well. And like I say, I don't think it needs the top 100mm from the WZ131, but I think the top 85, which this one isn't, would go down, you know, a treat on this tank and make it something really quite nice. And most of the games that I had were like this, and pretty poor games to be honest. And like I said, partly because I got myself into a bit of a bad mood with it, because I was quite disappointed, like I say, with the engine size and what have you. And the other part because I was playing it wrong, and I was still sort of, for some reason, trying to play it like a light tank, which I know sounds odd, but I've been through the Chinese lights. I've got the WZ-132 in my garage still, and they are not like most light tanks. They are more like a fast attack tank. And again, you know, using it like a fast attack tank, you could really do with that little bit extra horsepower. It's only 90, but it makes a difference. But I did manage to take down that Tiger, although it didn't seem to be paying too much attention to me. But like I say, this is how most of my rounds went in this. I did very little, and then I'd end up dying, and this was actually one of the better ones, until I changed the way that I was playing it, and started playing it differently. I'm playing it more like almost like a glass cannon medium, in a way. But the downside with that is, obviously, again, you know, this has the light tank matchmaking. One of the things they could have done is given it preferential matchmaking for a light tank, so it basically only saw up to tier 9. You know, leave it as it is, but give it maybe preferential matchmaking. But I think I'd rather be happier at keeping the matchmaking it's got, and like I say, getting the extra 90 horsepower from the top engine and the next 85mm up. But you know, that's my opinion on this tank. You know, that's what I try and do, just try and give you all the sort of ins and outs. And you know, a Tech Tree 131 is better than this. Now, I think this one, is this a tier? Was that a tier 10 match? I have seen a hell of a lot of tier 10 matches in this today. In fact, more tier 10 matches than anything else as well, which I don't think has helped. You know, I am still a little bit disappointed with it, and I'm trying to just give you all the details I can about it and my opinions on it. You know, like I say, this is not a lone tank, this is my own. I have bought this one for a couple of reasons why I bought the bundle with this and the Holland Hunt. One is because this does look really nice. You know, I do think it looks lovely. And I've got the other 4 monster tanks, and it kind of seemed a shame to leave one out, so that's why I picked up the bundle with both. I was just going to get this. You know, I didn't say there were good reasons, but they're the reasons anyway why I did decide to buy these. But in this match, I am platooned up with my lovely wife again. We've been doing that a bit recently. And I can't remember what she's in this match. But this is the best match that I've had in this today, and this is when I changed the way I was playing this tank. It's not quite quick enough to be one of these active scouts nipping around in front of the enemy, you know, ducking in and out. It's not quite quick enough for that. What it is quite good at is, I mean, it's a bit tricky on this one because obviously, you know, we've got the view range sort of restriction. However, I think they have changed it now so that it's not just a blanket change. I think it used to be 50%, and I think it has changed now, so it affects the different classes of tank differently. But yeah, I've just set up basically in a sort of passive scouting position, and it's proving quite effective. You know, I'm getting shots off. I've not been seen yet, which is quite nice, and that's down to the weather with the restriction on the view ranges. But from here I can just put shots in at a few things, and I find with this and with Chinese lights in general, especially the tier 7 and 8, you are better possibly doing something like this. If you are active scouting, just use a ridgeline to pop up and down, but obviously be aware you're probably not going to get shots off because your gun depression is terrible. And use them as sort of a late game finishing tank, you know, where you can find the more lone tanks, and you can move around very quickly and get into a position where you can put support in firing, and you can find lone damage tanks, and generally most of them, if you can get close enough without being seen, you can circle and outmaneuver them and be quite effective. And that's what I started to do in this one, and that's when I started having better games with this tank. And it like I say, you know, part of it was I was trying to play it too much like a light tank in a way. you know, like a sort of scouting light tank. But you know, these do work better as sort of almost playing them more like a glass cannon medium. But I've had to, well, I was using heat. I did have to swap to heat because I kept bouncing off the side of the E75. And that's you know, a tier 9 at the side of it, so that's, you know, one of the bases for my arguments that it could just do with that next 85mm up with the 159 pen. Because it's not a big jump up, it's not going to make it too good or anything like that, it's just going to make it that bit more competitive. Didn't quite get the last shot on him, but I'm now moving in because I think there's a few tanks on their own over here. And oh, that's not a good situation. That 121 just knackered my engine. That's my repair kit gone. I do manage to get a shot through his lower glacis, I think. Narrowly avoid that one, and I need to get out of there. I did put myself in a bad place there going around there. I had forgotten about that 121. I did see him earlier, and I just completely forgot that he was still over there somewhere. So I'm going to avoid him for now, and I'm going to go at this T-32, which I'm not sure, but it was almost as though he didn't notice me at first until I shot at him because he was aiming straight ahead, which has enabled me to get around him. But you do have to be quite careful with your placement of this tank, like I say, with the lack of gun depression. And that was very lucky that my tracks ate that. And if I can just get, there we go, the last shot in. You see the rate of fire on this is quite nice. You know, I'm not completely down on this tank. Like I said, I'm just a bit disappointed with it. And I think it could have, I think it does need something doing to it, possibly. I'm going to see if I can work on this TD with the heavy, try and track him. Not having much luck. And then a Hellhound goes around me, and the 121 comes back and takes a bit of vengeance on me. But as you can see by the battle ribbons, that was a much better match. And like I say, I mean, Chinese lights are not particularly easy to use because of the lack of gun depression, because of the lower power to weight ratio, because of the lower top speed than the sort of counterparts generally have. So they do take on a different sort of play style, but there you are. That's the Dragon Type 62. So I like to say, you know, I kind of like it, but now I've got over the initial disappointment. But I just think it could be better, and possibly should be better. But I'll leave it up to you to make up your own decision about that one, and I will do the Hellhound Bulldog review tomorrow for you. So until then, take care out there, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.